but for people who future are going to be looking, we're going live. We're live now. Welcome everybody to the Senate Democratic Caucus. It is Tuesday, the 28th of March, and we have lots to discuss, and we have to end early because we have judicial retention at 1 o'clock in the House chamber. So we're going to discuss dispatch and legislative compensation today. And we're going to begin, however, with Senator Ron Hinsdale discussing aspects of S-100, our housing bill. So take it away. Oh, and thank you. I think Senator Watson is coming in, but you have snacks from Senator Baza and Senator Clarkson, and we're hoping Watson is going to be adding to them, and maybe we'll get to see little Peter. So anyway, welcome. It's good to have you. Senator Ron Hinsdale, take it away.
Thank you. So I will be as transparent as possible with the information that I have. And I know S-100, I believe, will be up tomorrow or the day after. I just don't know what's happening with our calendar. So we're looking at S-100 hitting the floor tomorrow. Certainly, no matter what, I would love for people to come to me or Senator Bray with concerns or questions. There are several amendments. We're trying to make sure it's minimally confusing. We'll have anything that's technical that's added later on third reading. But I will say, you know, we are collectively aware of an amendment that might not have come to our committees formally yet. Senator Chittenden has brought preliminary language about the 25 units within 5 miles within 5 years to both of our committees, but at the time asked to withdraw them from consideration for a vote from our committee. So whether it's that amendment or other amendments, we'd really ask that you tell us today, ideally, so we can schedule time tomorrow before the floor to hear them. And if Senator Chittenden's amendment is moving forward in the way that it was presented generally when we saw it in committee, then, you know, I will just say that both committees would have a hard time with that. And I'll talk about why, but more importantly, that we would, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, I would personally be looking to introduce a potential substitute amendment that looked more closely at this issue. We have been hearing and understand that people want to make sure we're exploring all solutions to the housing crisis. This idea of building 25 units within 5 miles in 5 years, anywhere that development is allowed with zoning and bylaws, does come with potential unintended consequences. People have come to me over the course of the discussion of this bill, and they've asked essentially two things. Is this going to contribute to sprawl, and does this help second homeowners, just as much, if not more, than primary homeowners? This is the one area of the bill that really has very little to do with, affordable housing, mixed use housing, smart growth areas, and has the potential to accelerate development in places that are unintended. Many towns are not necessarily set up to have Act 250 disappear for up to 25 units and to be able to manage, even with whatever zoning and bylaws they have now, for that kind of acceleration into development. And what that means to me as the chair of the Housing Committee, who wants to see us continue a very thoughtful conversation into the future, is that if people start to see projects go up that drive them absolutely mad, that they see in a farm field or a view shed or somewhere, that they weren't anticipating seeing housing because of this bill, they are probably going to blame the legislature and curse S-100 forever and not want us to continue this thoughtful review between our two committees. I will just say our committee's job is to try and build more housing, and the Natural Resources Committee's job is to make sure that that doesn't increase sprawl, and that's done in a thoughtful way. And we're having a very thoughtful conversation right now. And so I just want to put this out there now so people are not surprised. I would like for us to be able to hear that amendment and consider something as a potential substitute in our committee tomorrow. And we'll just be checking in with folks. But we're really hoping that people will understand that this could have unintended consequences that people have been concerned about the entire time we've been talking about this bill. These 25 units could be any type of housing, single family or otherwise, that, you know, frankly, there's no reason why they couldn't just go to second homeowners. Everything else we've done in the bill is about multifamily housing in smart growth areas. And we have confirmed that it doesn't contribute to sprawl and that all the resources are going to workforce housing for people near where they work. So, you know, that's my final informal plea to you all before we continue the discussion tomorrow. But please come directly to me, Senator Bray, or leadership with any other concerns that you have.
Just chip in kind of.
Yeah, and then,
We haven't seen a final amendment, so I'm not sure exactly how it will work, but the proposal is an amazingly large shift from what active is provided for 53 years. So I would say if you look around Vermont, a lot of the smart development we've had, the maintenance of green spaces relies on that bill. I mean, those provisions already. So, you know, I think most of us live in towns or villages where you can see green farm space somewhere near the center of town or a block or two away, and spaces that we're trying to keep green. And they are going to be the cheapest, easiest, quickest place to develop without a review. So I think, or very limited review. So I would hope that people will stick with the deeply thought out and work through compromise between the two committees.
thank you. Thomas, quickly, because we're gonna move to dispatch.
Yeah, so I didn't see this on the agenda for this caucus, so, but I'm happy to speak to it since it is such an important topic. It is why I ran for office and why I'm going to introduce an amendment. We need more housing in Vermont. And I appreciate and respect the great work of economic development and Senate Natural Resources and what they've done so far. And I'm going to vote yes on the home bill. I support where it's landed. As I hear from advocates, as I hear from people that I respect, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, from people that know how to build homes and know what Vermont needs, this one little piece is just so important. I'm going to do a little bit of a spiel of what you'll hear on Thursday and my plea to vote for this. I grew up in South Burlington before city sewer and water came out down Dorset Street. I have lived, and I live in the same house I grew up in. I haven't gone very far in life. I have seen the development encroach around South Burlington, just south of Burlington. And I could point to you on my street, right across the street, two blocks down, these 9-unit subdivisions. This 9-unit subdivision is a result of this arbitrary 10-unit cutoff. And if we all agree we're in a housing crisis, by raising this 9 for maybe a period of time to just some additional number, when people are going to build those houses in these areas with subdivision planning and zoning, now they'll build a couple more. They'll build a few more. And that's exactly what Vermont needs. So I am going to introduce an amendment. I'm still working on the contours of that. I hope you'll support it. And as soon as I get those contours finalized, I will definitely circulate it with the whole body.
We will hope that
So you're
you'll
not
present them in committee tomorrow morning.
Working on the details of that.
Okay, but tomorrow morning, it's up on the floor tomorrow at 1. I would hope, Thomas, that you'd have that to both morning committees tomorrow morning.
Just want to reiterate the idea that Keisha put out, that all amendments should go through the committees of jurisdiction. They should have a chance to look at them. Obviously, if you see something on the floor, it's third reading. Sometimes there's a need to do that. In this case, there's plenty of time.
Thank you all. I think we're clear. We'll continue to discuss this. I would really like to turn us to 2 bills we have not discussed very much in this caucus. The first is the thorny issue of dispatch. And so to address that, I would call on Ann Watson, who has just arrived with Peter. I'm happy to hold Peter and Ruth Hardy. Peter, come on down here because you could hear the microphone is here and the screen is here. So, hi, Peter. It's good to have you. It's great to have you. So, oh, thank you, Peter. Here's for you.
That's right.
So Ruth and Ann. take it
Yeah,
away.
so Ann, do you want me to go or?
If
do
you want to
okay.
start.
I wasn't sure when you were gonna arrive, so
Yeah.
I,
I understand.
okay. The S-139 is a GovOps committee bill that deals with emergency dispatch or public safety dispatching. And we talked about it in other arenas, but haven't addressed it in this caucus yet. And I just want to give you a little background, which is that this is an issue that has been talked about for over 50 years. The first report about dispatch and emergency communications came out in 1970. And there have been over 20 reports since then about how to deliver regional public safety communications. The most recent one came out in December of 2022. We requested it last year in the big bill. And basically that report is a really good background of laying out what the problem is and the things that we need to solve. But what it basically says is this is a problem that needs to be solved by the legislature. So a group of us met at the beginning of the session, Senator Kitchell, Senator Brock, Senator Hashim and I, and really talked about how are we going to tackle this. And I was the last one to say not it. So the Government Operations Committee took on this project of trying to tackle it, and that's why we have a committee bill. And the things that report, the 2022 report, said that we needed to really address was, one, who is going to be in charge of oversight at the state level, so that when somebody calls 911, the appropriate entity is dispatched to help with their emergency or their situation. And to make sure that we're all on the same system around the state, that the service is equitable, that the funding is equitable, and that there's failover and backup, and we're all, can talk to each other, and that all of it has a sort of statewide umbrella to ensure equity and quality across the state. Because some of our communities have really good dispatching services and some do not. And so that was the tension we were trying to solve. The second thing was, how do we have a regional governance structure or a regional sort of structure of delivering those services? Because of the geography and the sheer number of entities that need to be dispatched, having a statewide single entity that does all dispatching is far too complex and not necessarily possible. And so doing it regionally makes a lot more sense. In addition, there are places where it's really working well. So we don't want to, take away the places that it's really working well. The third thing is a funding source. Right now, it's really funded in a patchwork system of some places it's, contracts with your sheriff's department, which we just heard about. Sometimes it's contracts or intermunicipal agreements of towns just sort of getting together and saying, let's do dispatch together. Some entities dispatch themselves. So it's really a patchwork. And Senator Watson has put together a really awesome map, which I printed out, but unfortunately it's not in color, so you can't really see it. But there's like an amazing, it's hanging in the GovOps room if you want to look at it. And we can send you an interactive thing so you can click on your community. It's really kind of a mishmash across the state and doesn't have uniformity. So those were the things we were trying to solve, and we tried to do it quickly because it was a new issue that to most of us, Senator Watson had a lot of direct experience as a former mayor, but a lot of us were just learning on the fly. We heard from nearly all of your communities. We had somebody in from almost every part of the state to find out what is going on with dispatch in your community. And so we did take a lot of testimony, hearing from people saying, this is how it works where I live. And what we came up with was a bill that tries to address those three main things: statewide oversight, regional provision of services, and a funding mechanism. And it's certainly got a ways to go. The Finance Committee is looking at it now. It's not made crossover. I know that the House is already starting to look at this issue. I heard from them over the weekend to try to sort of get ahead of the game on it, because this is really a priority for a lot of communities that don't have good dispatching services. So I'm going to talk about the first two, and then I'm going to turn it over to Senator Watson to talk about the funding. But the statewide oversight body that we, after taking a lot of testimony from sort of state level officials and hearing from the Department of Public Safety that they don't really want to do this, we talked with the current E911 board and worked very closely with Barb Neal and who is the executive director, and Roger Marcoux, who is the board chair, to come up with a way to expand the authority of that board so that they would oversee both dispatch and E911. Expands the membership of the board and makes modifications. We also created a transition advisory committee that's made up of people on the ground working on this issue in our communities, as well as dispatchers themselves. So that the E911 board, which we call the Vermont Public Safety Communications Board, I believe, would have the oversight authority. There would be a transition period of the first 6 months would be a lot of data collection and working with experts on what to do. And then over the next 5 to 7 years, there would be a transition into using the formula and meeting the standards and having plans in all of the regions of the state. So the regional dispatch centers could either be existing centers that have their plans approved by the state. So for example, in Hartford, where Senator White lives, they have an excellent dispatching center. We heard from them, we heard how they fund it, how they provide services. They could continue to exist. They would just have to make a plan, send it to the Public Safety Board and get it approved, and then they can continue to exist and provide the services they do. Another option is the state dispatching centers. We have 2 of them. We used to have 4 of them. Part of the problem is that 2 of them were closed, and that put a lot of pressure on the current ones. They dispatch for state police, but they also dispatch for a lot of local communities. But that pressure has caused a lot of turnover and problems with staffing. So those would continue to exist, and there could even be the option of creating a new one or reopening one of the ones that closed. But they could continue to provide services, but the towns that get their dispatching services through them would have to pay into the system, and Senator Watson will talk about that. And then the third option is a new intermunicipal agreement. So if all the municipalities in Addison County, for example, wanted to get together and create a regional dispatch center because there isn't one in Addison County, they could do that, and they would have to create a plan and have it also approved. So there are lots of options. We're not going to get rid of anything that's already working, but we need to be able to create a statewide system that has equity and excellent service. And now I'm going to turn over to Ann for the funding.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna try to stand up here. There we go. Okay.
So as Senator Hardy said, so there's a collection formula that's in the bill right now, and there's a distribution formula. So that's going to be reviewed by the Finance Committee, but as it stands right now, every town would pay into a state fund dedicated to dispatch. And that means that some of the towns, as Senator Hardy said, that are getting the benefits of being the recipients of emergency services, they're not paying in right now. So in a way, you could think of them as the only way that they're paying is through taxes, whereas a lot of other municipalities that have agreements with regional dispatch centers, they're paying through their taxes, but also through their property taxes to these intermunicipal agreements. So because this is going to mean that some towns are going to start paying that haven't been paying before, we wanted to recognize that there are some towns that have more access to funds or wealth than others. So the formula for collection is broken up into 2 parts. There's a base fee and there's a remainder. So the base fee we assume would stay relatively constant. That is multiplied by a percentage of the equalized grand list that is in that town relative to the whole state. So if a town doesn't have a lot of grand list value, then they would be paying less of that overall base fee. And then the remainder, which is intended to be a sort of a floating part, is modified as a percentage of statewide call volume. So if you have a town that has maybe they're small or big or rich or poor, whatever, they call a lot, they're going to end up paying for a larger portion of that remainder. And then the distribution is intended to go back towards these regional dispatch centers. And so that depends on how many municipalities are a part of that particular regional dispatch center. So whatever towns are a part of that, the regional dispatch center would get the benefit of what those towns are paying in. But the formula, again, as it stands right now, acknowledges that some of the services provided are provided by the state police, and so the dispatch center would just get the proportion of funding that that dispatch center actually provided. So it allows that money that a town provided to be split into the dispatch centers that serve it, basically. And so that's how the funding, at least right now, is intended to work. And I just want to also highlight that as a part of the plans that regional dispatch centers would have to provide, it ensures that all these, and Senator Hardy said this, but I just want to highlight it. It ensures that we as a state will all be moving towards operating with the same high quality technology standards, because right now, some dispatch centers, they can't actually talk to each other on the same platforms. So if you can imagine being in an emergency situation and having to change platforms that you're trying to just push out information towards, that is costing us safety, that is costing time, that is very stressful. So getting us all on the same technology will be huge. It'll also ensure that dispatchers have similar minimum training standards so that we all get a high quality service, and it ensures that all of this is kind of a term of art, but continuity of operations or failover, it's basically as if all the phones are busy or if some of the technology goes down, what happens then? There's got to be a plan for where those calls go. And so it would ensure that all of those plans are in place and being tested on a regular basis. So there's more that are a part of those plans. I wanted to highlight those as well. And there's a lot of other nuances, I think that's probably fair to say, that are a part of the bill. You know, what about these towns on the border that receive dispatching from other from out of state, or what about the single member, I should say, dispatch centers that dispatch just for a single municipality? All of that is built into the bill. Some of it is like, well, there's going to be a study. We want the committee that's going to study it to take up those issues. But we've done a lot of thinking about those kinds of exceptions. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So we don't have time for too many questions right now. If let's take one or two, and then we're going to move to legislative compensation.
Hello, Senator Campion.
Senator Campion.
Thanks. I did receive a couple of emails from Bennington County. You may have heard from folks from Bennington County, but here's what the gist of it is. We have excellent dispatch centers serving many of our local emergency services, asking us now to fund the state operated one is what they're looking for. They feel like it's negatively impacting them. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so.
Okay, I'm sorry if it was already explained.
No, you're totally fine. And so in Bennington, if they have excellent regional dispatch center, they can continue as an excellent regional dispatch center. All they would need to do is provide their plan. And if they have an excellent research, the plan is not hard. Like, it's basically, this is what we're doing, and this is how we meet the standards.
And they say pay for something else statewide.
So I think there's a confusion that the local municipalities will be paying for some big state bureaucracy. Okay. And that is not the case right now. The positions in the state level bureaucracy would be paid by the general fund, and the state dispatching would still be general fund. So the state police, et cetera, would still be paid for by the general fund. There would be the municipalities would pay into a system that then pays for municipal dispatching. So if your local dispatch center right now is paid for through your town budget, there still would be a line in the town budget that would pay up into the state system, and then they would get money back. And one of the reasons why, we want it so that the local municipalities are paying up to the state and then we're sending the money back is not dissimilar to the arguments for a statewide school funding system. It allows the state to ensure equity in the level of service and the standards so that we can say, in order to get your funding, you need to meet statewide standards and you have to play nice with others. You have to agree to failover and backup. You have to do the mutual aid. You have to be part of the bigger system in the state. So for places where it's working, I don't think there's going to be much of a change. The most of the change is going to be how it's financed. I have a summary that Ann and I put together along with the Legislative Council summary that's the sort of basic section by section. I'm happy to make copies or email it to anybody if they have more questions.
Great. I think we just need to, because this is just our overview, we'll follow up, we'll have more discussion. And I think everyone should take a peek at the overview. That's terrific. Thank you for putting that together. Next on the docket is an introduction to the legislative compensation bill S39, which Beckel, Senator White and Senator Hardy are going to present. Okay, Senator White.
Cool. Okay, hi everybody. So S39, this is, in my opinion, one of the most critical conversations we can have about ourselves with ourselves, which is how much do we think is reasonable for the average person to be paid to do public service in Vermont. The impetus for this bill is in part the mass exodus we had this last session, particularly of working Vermonters who wanted to continue in public service, but the financial barriers to continuing that work were too high. They had to prioritize raising a family, saving in a 401k, access to health insurance, all sorts of things that we take as expectations in most other workplaces, but we don't have for ourselves as General Assembly members. So your esteemed Government Operations Committee spent time reviewing bills that the House introduced as well as proposals on our side, and we came out with a unanimous tripartisan decision on some following changes to our compensation and benefits. The first, the sections I can go through section by section, but I'll just give you the highlights. They're not exactly in order that you'll see in the section by section. The first is that we increase our legislative pay on a weekly basis. So, and we tie that legislative pay to the average Vermont wage. That actually resets us back to work that we had done around 20 years ago, where we were tied to the average Vermont wage. We stopped that around 2005, and now we're returning to that same formula. The idea being that if you are an average Vermont citizen, which mean salary or mean wage is around $55,000 a year annually, we are getting a prorated amount for the 18 weeks on average that we serve. So that's the idea, is tying it to that average mean Vermont salary. That would increase our salary starting in 2025. So just to be clear, none of us are getting that unless we all run for election and win our elections. So this is not affecting your salary this biennium. That, and you can say with a standing optics, talking to your constituents, I'm not raising my own pay, if that's something that matters to you. We're gonna go from $811 a week to $1,210 a week. That includes the increases that we would have seen with the Pay Act, all of the additions that we already have that happen every year. We also have professional development compensation. So if you're someone who likes to go to the National Conference of State Legislators, if there's a conference or a professional development opportunity, you would also be eligible for compensation for that work. Because we all know that we can learn from other states in our subject area professional organizations. It writes some unpaid labor that we do right now, which if you're like me, you do a lot of work outside of this building. So not only do I work typically 6 days a week with this job, during session, I also work outside of the legislative session time period, going to constituent meetings, researching legislation, a whole host of things. I'm sure almost all of us, if not all of us, do that. So we have an allowance for 1/5 of your pay to get a day off session during the week paid for. So that's off session pay, that's writing that unpaid work that we're doing now, that many of us don't have the ability to work on a day that we also have constituent service requirements that we have to do. So you're typically not getting paid at your other job if you have to have another job to do constituent services. So that's helping compensate for that. We have a very relevant conversation today, a child care dependent and elder care benefit that's available to us. That benefit is connected to what the state employees get. So we're not getting a richer benefit than the state employees. It's tied in the same way to that benefit. And that would be up to $1,600 that you could use to cover directly related child care, elder care, dependent care costs that keep you from, basically facilitate your ability to do the job. So a great example would be, let's say you have a caucus meeting and you need to have childcare during that meeting. This would be something you could use to directly cover that cost. Just an example, not sure it will come up. We also have health insurance. You might be familiar with one particular representative who is dealing with a serious medical situation without the ability to access health insurance. We do not have health insurance. That is a problem because most of us don't also have the ability to work the requisite amount of hours to get health insurance from another employer. So you're unable to access health insurance, which means that you are having a barrier to yourself getting that health insurance potentially, and anyone who needs health insurance to serve in this job either has to be married, like myself, I get health insurance through my spouse, they have to go on the exchange, or they have to find it through being retired. The list just goes on. If there are examples where you can get health insurance, but it's very difficult and that limits the amount of people who can do public service. So that is essentially the highlights of the bill. I wanted to read one quick quote and then I'm happy to take questions. This is a tripartisan issue. I just want to read a quote from Randy Brock in a letter to the editor that he wrote, which outlines many of the changes that we have in the bill, which is none of this is designed to enrich legislators. On the contrary, it's to ensure that we can attract a citizen legislator composed of real citizens. We are behind the times. We are below the average as we stand for compensation as a legislature. Even with these increases, we are still below the average for compensation and benefits of other state legislators. And we are one of the most retired and independently wealthy comprised legislators nationwide. So that is why I feel strongly about this bill, and I'm happy to take questions.
Do you want to briefly talk about the task force, which will
Yes.
address all the other things that we might want to address?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Clarkson. So we haven't solved all the issues. There are lots of questions, including what is the proper length of time for the legislature to be in service? We've had that question brought up. What does it look like for us to have differences between different types of service that people do in the legislature? Whether you're a chair, whether you're doing you're a House rep or a senator. We didn't posit any changes in those categories, but do have a task force that's designed to look at those questions to make sure we get it right in the future and just analyze this problem in more depth.
So we'll take one question because I'm cognizant of our time and I know we have to hit the loo and clean up before we get up to the floor again for judicial retention. So does anyone have one question? Either that or we can talk to Hardy and White at another point, or any of us on Senate government.
If you have specific questions about what the health insurance benefit would look like or what the compensation package changes would be, we have that all available, including the fiscal note. So if you have questions.
Great. Senator Bright, one question.
The quick question is, where's the bill? What's the status? What's the pathway?
S39 is right now in appropriations. They're looking at it. I don't know if they're most likely will be coming out with an amendment. I don't know.
Well, so this is all ongoing discussion, and as you pointed out, it touches everybody. So I'm going to be talking with lots of different people about it, and then talking with Jane as chair of appropriations and see where we go.
So it's missed crossover, so we would have to ask for dispensation from the House at this point. They are as invested in solving this problem as we are. So thank you, everybody. Let's head to the floor, and if somebody would like to help me clean up.
Can I
that-
say one thing, please?
Yeah.
I'd just like to say congratulations to all of us for passing S18,
Woo-hoo!
and in particular to Senator Gould for doing an outstanding job on the
You
floor.
did a rocking job.
Where's my